My son and daughter said, "Find your own place, we don't fit together here anymore." After 50 years of supporting everyone, I sold the house they were living in and moved into my $100 million skyscraper. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My kingdom, for 50 years, has smelled of yeast, slow braised collard greens, and the sweet sharp tang of my grandmother's secret barbecue sauce. Martha's Kitchen, tucked away on a side street near Howard University, is more than a restaurant, it's a living, breathing archive of my life. A testament to a promise I made to myself as a young, hungry woman with nothing to my name but a book of family recipes and a fire in my belly. The worn linoleum floors have been scuffed by the shoes of civil rights leaders, of poets, of generations of students who were far from home and in need of a meal that tasted like love. This small, unassuming restaurant in Washington, D.C. is my legacy, or so my children believe. I sat in my usual booth, the red vinyl cracked and familiar, and watched my two children, my greatest works and my most profound failures, move through the end of the Sunday dinner rush. My son, Samuel Jr., or Sam, as he insisted on being called, was 49 years old, and moved with the slow, put-upon air of a man who believes he is destined for greater things. He was the general manager, a title he'd been given but had never truly earned. He was overseeing the cleanup, his movements lazy, his expression one of profound, weary boredom. He was a prince who had been born in a palace of hard work, and had spent his entire life resenting the fact that it wasn't a real palace. My daughter Lena was 46, and she was a different animal altogether. She was sharp, ambitious, and moved through the world with the brisk, impatient energy of a woman who is perpetually 5 minutes late for a more important engagement. She was here tonight, not to help but to supervise her brother, a role she had taken upon herself with a grim managerial relish. She was married to a successful lobbyist, a man who moved in the quiet, powerful circles of the capital, and she had absorbed the scent of that world like a cheap perfume. To her, Martha's Kitchen was not a legacy, it was an anchor, a dusty, slightly embarrassing piece of her past that was holding her back from the glittering future she felt she was owed. They both lived in the house. The big, beautiful, and deeply historic brownstone in Ledroit Park that had been in my family for 3 generations. I had raised them there. I had raised their own children there, stepping in as a full-time grandmother, after their own marriages had crumbled under the weight of their respective ambitions and discontents. But I did not live there anymore. 3 years ago, after my last grandchild had left for college, I had moved into the small, simple apartment above the restaurant. "It's just more practical, dears," I had told them. "Easier for an old woman to manage." The truth was, I could no longer bear the atmosphere in my own home. It was thick with their resentments, with their quiet, constant pressure, with the unspoken but ever-present feeling that I was an obstacle, a relic, a stubborn old woman who was sitting on their future. They did not see the brownstone as my home. They saw it as their inheritance, and they were tired of waiting for me to die to collect it. The discontent had been a quiet, simmering thing for years, a low-grade infection in the body of our family, but it had begun to fester, to grow more bold in the past year. Their generation, the one that had grown up in the shadow of the civil rights movement, had a different understanding of success. My generation had fought for a seat at the table. Theirs felt they should own the whole damn restaurant. I remember a conversation a few months ago on the wide, beautiful porch of the brownstone. It was a perfect spring evening, the air sweet with the scent of the jasmine I had planted years ago. I was sitting in my favorite old rocking chair. Lena was pacing the length of the porch, her high heels clicking an angry, impatient rhythm on the old floorboards. "This neighborhood is exploding, Mother," she had said, her voice a sharp, clinical instrument. "The property values are astronomical. A house like this, with its historical details, its location, it's a gold mine, and we're just sitting on it. We are living on it, Lena." I had corrected her gently. "It is our home. It's an underperforming asset," she had shot back, the cold corporate jargon a jarring and ugly sound in the soft evening air. "We could sell this place, take the money, and really build something. Sam could open a real restaurant, a modern one, something with a celebrity chef and a marketing budget. I could finally launch my political consultancy firm. We could build real wealth, real power, not just this." She had gestured with a dismissive wave of her hand at the quiet, tree-lined street, at the neighborhood that had nurtured our family for a century. She had made it sound like a slum. Sam, who had been sitting on the porch steps nursing a beer, had just nodded along, a sullen, resentful agreement on his face. "She's right, Ma," he had mumbled. "This place, it's a dead end. We're trapped here, running a greasy spoon while the whole world is passing us by." A greasy spoon. That was my mother's legacy. My life's work. The place that had put both of them through college. That had paid for their expensive weddings. That was still in its quiet, unassuming way, funding their comfortable and deeply ungrateful lives. I had looked at my two children, my beautiful, ambitious, and deeply, deeply lost children, and my heart had ached. They saw my life, a life of quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying work, as a failure. They saw the beautiful, historic home that had been the cradle of our family as a cage. They were so blinded by the glittering, superficial promise of a wealth they had not earned that they could not see the profound and deeply valuable richness of the life they already had. The seeds of their discontent had taken deep root, and I knew, with a quiet, sorrowful certainty, that they were about to come into a bitter and deeply poisonous bloom. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, almost surgical and deeply cruel affair. It happened a week after that conversation on the porch. They had asked me to come to the brownstone for a family meeting. The very phrase had sent a cold chill down my spine. I found them waiting for me in the formal living room, a room we rarely used, a museum of my grandmother's antique furniture. They were not sitting, they were standing side by side, a united and deeply intimidating front. They looked like a corporate delegation about to deliver some very bad news. "Mom," Sam began, his voice a little too loud, a little too formal. He was the designated spokesman, but I could see Lena's words, her ambition, her cold, hard resolve. In his eyes, "Lena and I have been talking, and we've made a decision." I did not speak. I just sat down in my grandmother's old wing-backed chair, my hands folded in my lap, and I waited. I was a judge, and I was about to hear the prosecution's opening statement. "We love you, Mom," he continued, the words a hollow, meaningless preamble. "And we are so grateful for everything you've done for us. For letting us live here, for helping with the kids, for everything." "But," he said, and the word was the turning point, the pivot upon which our family was about to break. "It's time for a change. We're not kids anymore, Ma. We're adults, with our own lives, our own ambitions. And this house, it's just not working for us anymore. It's too small for our growing families, for our professional needs." It was a lie, of course. Their children were grown and gone. The house was a vast echoing cavern for the two of them. "So," he said, taking a deep, shaky breath, the coward steeling himself for the killing blow. "Lena and I, we've decided that it's time for us to take over the house. For you to find your own place. A smaller place. Something more manageable for a woman of your age." The condescension in his voice was a physical thing, a slimy, unwelcome touch. And then Lena, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. She was the closer, the one who would deliver the final brutal and non-negotiable terms. Her voice was not emotional, not angry. It was the calm, rational, and utterly merciless voice of a woman who has already won. "We think it's for the best, Mother," she said, her voice a cool, silken thing. "You've spent your entire life supporting everyone else. It's time for you to think about yourself, to downsize, to simplify. The truth is," she said, and her eyes for the first time met mine, and they were as cold and as hard as river stones. "You need to find your own place. We don't fit together here anymore." The words were a quiet, elegant, and deeply effective assassination of my role in my own family. I was no longer the matriarch. I was no longer the foundation. I was just in the way. An old, inconvenient piece of furniture that was cluttering up their beautiful, ambitious new lives. And it was time for me to be moved to the attic. The silence that followed their quiet, brutal declaration was a living, breathing thing. It was filled with the ghosts of 50 years of my own sacrifice. In that one terrible, suspended moment, my entire life seemed to flash before my eyes. Not as a series of happy memories, but as a long, detailed, and deeply unbalanced ledger of my own giving. I saw myself as a young woman of 22. Putting my own dreams of a college education on hold to take over the family restaurant after my mother's sudden death, so that my own younger brother and sister could finish their schooling. I saw myself a few years later, a new mother, working 18-hour days in the hot, relentless chaos of the restaurant kitchen. My body aching with a fatigue so profound it was a physical pain, so that my own two children, my beautiful Sam and Lena, could have the private school education I had never had. I saw myself in this very house, in the middle of the night holding a colicky screaming baby Lena, walking the worn floorboards of this living room for hours, so that my husband, a good man but a heavy sleeper, could get his rest before his long shift at the factory. I saw myself at this very kitchen table, years later patiently helping a frustrated teenage Sam with his algebra homework, a subject I despised, but one he needed to pass to get into the college he had set his heart on. I saw myself selling a piece of my own mother's jewelry, a precious irreplaceable heirloom, to fund the down payment on Lena's first disastrous marriage to a man I knew was no good for her. Because my daughter had been in love, and her happiness at that moment was more important to me than my own history. And I saw myself just 10 years ago after my own grandchildren's parents had divorced, turning this beautiful historic brownstone not into my own quiet peaceful sanctuary of retirement, but into a noisy chaotic and deeply loving daycare center. I had put my own life on hold, again to raise a second generation of children, to give them the stability and the love that their own self-absorbed parents were too busy to provide. 50 years, half a century of putting everyone else first, of being the strong one, the steady one, the provider, the quiet, uncomplaining foundation upon which they had all built their own, comfortable and deeply entitled lives. And my reward for that 50 years of sacrifice was this: a quiet, polite and deeply cruel eviction notice, delivered by my own 2 children. Find your own place. We don't fit together here anymore. The pain of it was not a sharp, hot thing. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply profound agony. It was the grief of a woman who has just been made to realize that her entire life's work of love and sacrifice has been, in the end, completely and utterly misunderstood. They did not see my sacrifices as gifts. They saw them as their due. They did not see my love as a foundation. They saw it as a cage. I looked at their faces. My son's a mask of weak, guilty resolve. My daughter's a picture of cool, impatient and utterly unapologetic ambition. And I saw them for what they were. Not my children. Not anymore. They were strangers. 2 greedy, ungrateful strangers who were standing in my house. The house that my sweat and my sacrifice had maintained. And they were politely but firmly showing me the door. The judge in a courtroom, the general on a battlefield, the mother in a family crisis, they all know one fundamental truth. You never ever let your opponent see the true state of your own forces. You never let them see your weakness. And you most certainly never let them see your strength. In that moment in my grandmother's wing-backed chair, I felt a wave of pure white-hot and deeply liberating rage. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the sacrifices, about the long nights, about the secret parallel life I had been living for 50 years, while they had been blissfully ignorantly living off the fruits of it. I wanted to unleash the full, terrible and glorious truth of my own power upon them. But I did not. The rage was a luxury I could not afford. An emotional outburst would be a mistake. It would give them what they wanted, a hysterical, emotional and in their eyes, slightly senile old woman, proving their point that she was no longer fit to manage her own affairs. It would be a strategic blunder. So, I did the opposite. I took all of my rage, all of my grief, all of my profound and deeply satisfying secret knowledge, and I packed it away. I locked it in a cold, dark, and utterly impenetrable vault, deep in the center of my soul. And the woman who was left, the woman who looked up at her 2 triumphant predatory children, was a different woman entirely. She was a picture of weary, heartbroken and deeply defeated resignation. I let out a long, slow and deeply theatrical sigh. It was a sigh that was full of the weight of a lifetime of disappointment. A sigh that was a masterpiece of maternal martyrdom. If that's what you think is best, I said, and my voice was a small, frail and slightly trembling thing. I did not have to fake the tears that welled in my eyes. The grief for the children I had lost was a real and deeply useful thing. The relief on their faces was a disgusting and deeply illuminating thing. It was so profound, so absolute, that it was almost comical. They had been prepared for a fight, for a messy, emotional, guilt-ridden battle. They had not been prepared for my immediate and total surrender. "Oh, Mom, we knew you'd understand," Sam said, his voice flooding with a grateful and deeply patronizing relief. He rushed forward and knelt by my chair, taking my hand in his. His touch was a repulsive, unwelcome thing, but I let him hold it. "This is for the best, Mother," Lena said, her own voice losing its hard, corporate edge, and taking on a tone of soothing, gentle condescension. "You'll see, we'll help you find a lovely little apartment. Something new and clean and easy to manage. You won't have to worry about a thing. They were so happy, so triumphant. They had won. They had successfully, and with a surprising, almost disappointing ease, deposed the old queen. They were now the undisputed rulers of their new kingdom. I'm just very tired, I whispered, my voice a perfect quavering instrument of elderly frailty. I pulled my hand from my son's grasp. I think I need to go back to my own apartment. I need to rest, and to think. Of course, Mom, Sam said, all loving, solicitous concern now that he had gotten what he wanted. Let me walk you out. He helped me from my chair, his hand on my elbow as if I were a fragile porcelain doll. I played the part to perfection. I leaned on him just a little. I let my steps be slow, and slightly shuffling. I walked out of my own living room, out of my own home, a defeated, broken, and utterly fraudulent old woman. They watched me go, their faces full of a mixture of pity and a deep, profound, and deeply satisfying relief. The obstacle had been removed. The future was theirs. They had no idea that they had not just won a small domestic skirmish. They had just, with their own greedy and deeply foolish hands, declared a war. A war they were not prepared for. A war they were about to lose in the most spectacular and most public way imaginable. The moment the heavy oak door of the brownstone closed behind me, the frail, defeated, and heartbroken old woman vanished. She simply evaporated, a theatrical ghost leaving the stage. The woman who walked down the front steps and onto the quiet, tree-lined street was someone else entirely. Her back was straight, her steps were firm and purposeful, and her eyes, which had been full of a watery geriatric sadness just moments before, were now as clear, as cold, and as hard as a winter sky. I did not go back to my small, simple apartment over the restaurant. Not yet. I walked the 2 blocks to a small, quiet park. A place of old oak trees and forgotten Civil War monuments. I sat on a familiar wrought iron bench, and I took out my phone. The first part of my plan, the strategic retreat, was complete. It was now time to mobilize my own, secret and infinitely more powerful army. I had only one soldier in that army, but he was all I needed. I dialed the private encrypted number of Mr. Augustine Cole, my wealth manager, my co-conspirator, my oldest and most loyal friend. He had been a scholarship boy at Howard with me, a brilliant, hungry kid from the wrong side of the tracks who had, like me, built an empire from scratch. He was the only person in the world who knew the full, staggering, and deeply satisfying truth of my 50-year double life. He answered on the first ring, his voice the calm, deep, and utterly unflappable baritone of a man who is accustomed to moving mountains. "Martha," he said. He did not ask if I was all right. He knew this call was not a social one. He knew this was the call he had been waiting for, with a grim, patient loyalty for years. "Augustine," I said, my own voice a thing of pure, cold, and utterly unshakable resolve. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a low, slow, and deeply satisfied sound. The sound of a man who is about to enjoy a moment of long overdue righteous justice. He chuckled. "They finally did it, didn't they?" he said. "The little fools, they finally pushed you too far." "They did," I said. And in a few, clipped and deeply unemotional sentences, I told him everything. The family meeting, the demand that I move out, the quiet, brutal, and deeply satisfying lie of my surrender. He listened, his silence a deep and deeply appreciative thing. He was not just a numbers man, he was a strategist. He appreciated the elegance of a well-executed plan. "So, the brownstone," he said. When I was finished, "You're ready?" "I am," I said. "Put it on the market. Immediately. But not the public market. A private, off-market sale. I want it done quickly. I want it done quietly, and I want it done for a price that will make their heads spin. You will find a corporate, anonymous buyer. A holding company. No names, no personal connection to me. I want the sale to be a mystery. A ghost. Consider it done," he said, his voice humming with a quiet, professional joy. "I have a list of international investors who would kill for a property like that. It will be sold by the end of the week." "Good," I said. "And the other thing, the new residence." "It's ready, Martha," he said, and his voice was now full of a warm, genuine, and deeply proud affection. "It's been ready for a year. The penthouse is finished. The staff is on standby. All you have to do is say the word." I looked up, through the branches of the old oak trees, at the glittering new money skyline of downtown D.C., and I saw it, in my mind's eye. My secret. My masterpiece. The tallest, most beautiful and most expensive new building in the entire city. The building I had secretly, quietly and very, very profitably built. The Jennings Tower. The word is now Augustine, I said, my voice a quiet, final and deeply satisfying whisper. It's time for me to go home. My secret life began, as most important things do, with a quiet, simple and deeply pragmatic decision. It was 1975. The restaurant which I had inherited from my mother was doing well. It was a modest but steady success. I was a young widow with 2 small children, and I was terrified of a sudden illness, of a bad economy, of a world that was not, and has never been particularly kind to a single black working mother. I knew, with a certainty that was born of a deep ancestral fear, that I could not rely on a single source of income. I could not put all of my faith, and all of my family's future, in a business that was as fickle as the city's changing tastes. I needed a second front. I needed a fortress. So I started to buy property. It was not a glamorous enterprise. It was the opposite of glamorous. I did not buy fancy buildings in fashionable neighborhoods. I bought the junk. I bought the small, forgotten and deeply unloved pieces of Washington, D.C. that no one else wanted. A boarded-up row house in a bad neighborhood, a small derelict commercial building with a leaky roof, a vacant, weed-choked lot next to a noisy overpass. I bought them with the small, steady profits from the restaurant. The money that I should have been using to buy a nicer car, or a bigger house, or the private school education my children would later demand. I used to buy dirt. I used to buy bricks and mortar. And I learned. I spent my nights not in front of a television but at the public library poring over zoning maps and city planning documents. I learned how to read a neighborhood, how to see not what it was but what it could become. I learned that a new metro line, a new government building, a new school could in the space of a few years turn a bad neighborhood into a transitional one, and a transitional one into a desirable one. And my one true and deeply secret advantage was my restaurant. Martha's Kitchen was the unofficial town hall of Black D.C. It was where the city council members, the urban planners, the union bosses, the quiet, powerful men and women who really ran this city came to eat. And they talked. And I, the quiet, smiling woman who was just refilling their coffee cups, I listened. I listened to the whispers of a new development deal, of a shift in zoning, of a new federal building that was about to be commissioned. I was the most well-informed and the most invisible real estate investor in the entire city. Augustine Cole, who was then a brilliant, young and deeply ambitious financial planner, was the one who helped me turn my small patchwork collection of ugly duckling properties into a real and very powerful swan. He helped me set up the holding companies, the layers of corporate anonymity, the offshore accounts that would allow me to build my empire in the shadows. For 50 years I lived a double life. By day I was Martha Jennings, the friendly, hard-working owner of a beloved soul food restaurant, a woman of simple means and even simpler tastes. By night I was the silent, invisible and deeply, deeply wealthy head of a real estate empire that was quietly but inexorably devouring the city. My children saw none of it. They saw the woman who came home smelling of fried chicken and collard greens. They saw the woman who drove a 10-year-old Buick. They saw the mother who always seemed to be pinching pennies, and they were assured. They had no idea that their mother, their simple, embarrassing and in their eyes broke mother, was in fact the anonymous and deeply mysterious developer who was changing the very skyline of the city they lived in. And my final greatest project, the culmination of a lifetime of secret patient work, was the Jennings Tower. A soaring, $100 million skyscraper of black glass and steel, the newest, most luxurious and most talked about building in all of DC. A building I had designed, I had financed, and I now, through a series of anonymous, untraceable corporations, owned, lock, stock and barrel. And at the very top of that tower, a 3-story glass-walled palace in the sky, was my new home, the penthouse. The place I had built for myself, my fortress. My final, beautiful and deeply satisfying declaration of a life they had never even known I was living. While I was quietly orchestrating the sale of their home and the preparation of my own, my children were engaged in their own, deeply predictable celebration. They believed they had won. They had finally, after years of quiet, resentful struggle, successfully deposed the stubborn old matriarch. Their victory in their minds was twofold. They had secured the house, the valuable brownstone they saw as their birthright. And they believed, successfully nudged me towards a more sensible and less burdensome stage of my life. Their actions were not in their own, self-serving narrative, an act of greed. They were an act of responsible, forward-thinking love. They threw a small, impromptu party at the brownstone that weekend, a gathering of their own carefully selected friends. It was not a celebration of my life or my legacy. It was a celebration of their new and imminent freedom. I knew this because Lena's best friend, a woman with a tongue as sharp as her designer heels, had called one of my own old friends to give a full, gloating and deeply detailed account of the evening. "Lena is just so relieved," she had apparently said over cocktails. Her mother is a sweet woman, of course, but she was just rattling around in that big old house. It was becoming a real burden. "This is so much better for everyone." They had spent the evening making plans. Grand, expensive plans for the money they were sure would be coming their way the moment the house was sold. Lena had talked of finally launching her political consultancy firm, of renovating the entire brownstone, of hiring a real professional decorator to finally get rid of all that old dusty junk. Sam had his own, equally grandiose dreams. He was going to leave the greasy spoon behind, he had declared. He was going to partner with a celebrity chef, open a sleek, modern and deeply unprofitable new restaurant in a hipper neighborhood, a place that would finally earn him the respect he felt he was owed. They were spending my money, the money from the sale of my house, with a frantic, joyful and deeply foolish abandon. They had already in their minds decorated their new lives with the proceeds of my defeat. They were even, in their infinite condescending generosity, making plans for me. Lena had called me the day after their party, her voice full of a bright, patronizing and deeply false concern. "Mother," she had said, "Sam and I have been doing some research. We've found the most wonderful new retirement community for you out in Maryland. It's called Golden Meadows. It's brand new and they have lovely little one-bedroom apartments. They even have a shuttle bus that takes the residents to the mall once a week. We can go and look at it on Saturday if you like." Golden Meadows, a shuttle bus to the mall. This was the future they envisioned for me. A small, clean and deeply beige box, where I could live out the last quiet and deeply irrelevant years of my life. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear," I had said, my own voice a masterpiece of grateful elderly humility. "But don't you worry about me. I have my own plans." "Of course you do," she had said, with a small, indulgent laugh. The laugh of a daughter who is absolutely certain that her mother's plans are of no real consequence to anyone. "Well, you just let us know if you need any help with the packing." Oh, I thought to myself, as I hung up the phone, you will all be helping me with the packing. You just don't know it yet. While my children were busy picking out paint swatches for my grandmother's living room and dreaming of their new, glorious and entirely fictional futures, my own, very real plan was moving forward with the quiet, relentless efficiency of a predator closing in on its prey. The sale of the brownstone was orchestrated by Augustine Cole with the precision and the discretion of a covert military operation. As I had instructed, he did not list it on the open market. There was no for sale sign planted in the front yard, no open houses for the nosy neighbors to traipse through. Instead, Augustine had made a single quiet phone call. The call was to the acquisitions department of a Zurich-based, international real estate investment firm. A firm that specialized in the anonymous purchase of high-value historic properties in stable world capitals. They were a firm that valued privacy, that dealt only in cash and that had been trying for years to get a foothold in the lucrative DC market. Augustine had offered them the brownstone. He had named a price that was a full 30% above its already astronomical market value. And he had given them a single non-negotiable condition. The sale had to be closed in cash with all funds transferred in less than 72 hours. The investors in Zurich, who knew a rare opportunity when they saw one, did not haggle, they did not hesitate. They said yes. The entire transaction, a deal worth millions of dollars, was conducted in a blur of encrypted emails and secure wire transfers. It was a ghost of a sale, a silent, invisible changing of the guard. By the end of the week, my family's ancestral home, the beautiful historic brownstone in Ledroy Park, the very foundation of my children's world, no longer belonged to our family. It now belonged to a numbered, anonymous corporation with a mailing address in Switzerland. I sat in my small apartment over the restaurant, and I watched the final wire transfer confirmation appear on the screen of my laptop. The number was breathtaking. It was a sum of money that could change a family's destiny for generations. It was the money my children were so sure was about to become theirs. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The money was now sitting in a secure and deeply inaccessible trust account, an account to which only Augustine and I held the keys. The first phase of my plan was complete. The asset had been liquidated. The trap was now loaded. All that was left was for the unsuspecting targets to wander into it. And I knew, with a quiet, grim certainty, that they would do so with a blind, arrogant, and deeply satisfying confidence. The official-looking envelope arrived on a Monday morning, a week after the secret spectral sale of the brownstone had been finalized. It was delivered not by the regular mailman but by a professional uniformed courier, a fact that in itself lent it an air of grave legal importance. Lena was the one who found it. It had been slipped through the mail slot of the front door and it was lying on the antique heart pine floor of the foyer, a stark cream-colored rectangle of impending doom. She picked it up. The envelope was addressed not to her brother but to current occupants. The return address was not a local law firm but a corporate P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, the anonymous heartland of American shell corporations. Her first reaction was annoyance. It was probably just junk mail, some aggressive new security company trying to sell them a system for the house they now considered theirs. She almost tossed it into the recycling bin, but some small nagging flicker of curiosity, or perhaps just a premonition of the coming storm, made her open it. The document inside was not an advertisement. It was a formal and deeply official legal notice. It was printed on thick watermarked paper and it was full of the cold, merciless language of the law. It began, "To the current unauthorized occupants of the property located at 84 Rutledge Avenue," and it ended with a single brutal and utterly incomprehensible sentence. "You are hereby given 30 days from the date of this notice to vacate the premises." It was signed, not by a person but by a sterile corporate entity, the Rutledge Avenue Historical Preservation Trust LLC. Lena read it once. She read it a second time. And then a third. The words did not change. The meaning did not soften. It was an eviction notice. A formal, legal, and utterly insane declaration that they were being thrown out of their own home. Her initial shock quickly morphed into a hot, indignant fury. This was of course a mistake. A ridiculous, bureaucratic screw-up. Or more likely it was her mother, her simple, slightly senile and deeply disorganized mother who had clearly in her own bumbling way, messed up the paperwork for the transfer of the deed. She called Sam immediately, her voice a sharp, angry buzzsaw of frustration. "You will not believe what your mother has done now," she had shrieked into the phone. Their annoyance at this stage was not directed at the anonymous corporation that had just legally evicted them. It was directed entirely and completely at me. They saw this not as a threat, but as an inconvenience, a messy, embarrassing and deeply typical piece of incompetence from their dear old and increasingly burdensome mother, who could not even be trusted to handle a simple real estate transaction correctly. Sam had called me, his own voice a masterpiece of strained, patronizing patience. "Mom," he had said, as if speaking to a particularly slow and difficult child. "There seems to be some kind of mix-up with the paperwork for the house. We got a strange letter today. You need to call your lawyer, Mom. You need to get this straightened out. We have decorators scheduled to come in next week." "Oh dear," I had said, my own voice a perfect instrument of elderly, flustered confusion. "A mix-up? I am so sorry, darlings. I will have Augustine look into it right away. Don't you worry your pretty little heads about a thing." I had hung up the phone, a slow, cold, and deeply satisfying smile spreading across my face. Oh, they had decorators coming. That was lovely. It was a shame they would have to meet them on the sidewalk. The next 2 weeks were a slow, agonizing descent into a new and deeply unfamiliar reality for my two children. The initial arrogant annoyance that this was all just a simple maternal screw-up began to curdle into a real and deeply unsettling panic. Augustine Cole, when they called him, was a perfect, impenetrable wall of polite professional obfuscation. "Yes, Mr. Jennings," he had said to Sam, his voice the smooth, unreadable baritone of a seasoned lawyer. "I am aware of the situation. Your mother has asked me to handle it. I can assure you we are looking into the matter." He had offered them no information, no comfort, no timeline, just the cool, calm, and deeply infuriating assurance that the matter was being handled. Their own lawyers, the ones they had on retainer for their own, much smaller business dealings, were equally useless. They had looked at the eviction notice. It was, they had declared, legally airtight. The sale, they had discovered after a few frantic phone calls to the city's land registry office, was completely and terrifyingly legitimate. The house had been sold, and they, the current occupants, had no legal right to be there. The new anonymous corporate owner was a ghost. There was no one to call, no one to negotiate with. There was only the stark, legal and rapidly approaching deadline of their own eviction. And then, the second phase of the demolition began. Their own carefully curated lives, which they had been funding with the blithe, confident assumption of their impending inheritance, began to unravel. Lena's platinum American Express card was declined at a high-end boutique in Georgetown. She had been in the middle of buying a ridiculously expensive handbag, a small celebratory gift to herself, and the public, deeply humiliating moment of the cashier's polite, "I'm sorry ma'am, this card has been rejected," had almost sent her into a full-blown hysterical rage. Sam had tried to secure a loan for his new visionary restaurant concept using his expected inheritance as collateral. The loan officer, a man who had been fawning over him just a month before, had suddenly become cold and distant. The bank, it seemed, had heard the whispers, the rumors of a family in financial disarray. The loan was politely but firmly denied. The life they had known, a life of easy credit and the powerful reassuring weight of the Jennings family name, was beginning to evaporate, and they were starting to feel the first, terrifying chill of a world without a safety net. The panic began to escalate. The calls to me became more frequent, more frantic, more demanding. "Mom, what is going on?" Lena had shrieked into the phone a week before the eviction date. "Augustine won't tell us anything. Our cards are being declined. Did you sell the house and just keep the money?" "Lena, darling," I had said, my voice a soothing, gentle and deeply infuriating balm of maternal calm. "You told me to find my own place. I am simply following your advice. The estate is being settled, dear. These things take time. You just need to be patient." Patience, of course, was a virtue that neither of them possessed. And time was a luxury that they had just officially run out of. The final day arrived, as all final days do, with a brutal and deeply indifferent punctuality. It was a cold, gray and drizzly DC morning. A perfect day for a funeral. And today was the funeral for the life my children had always known. I was not there to witness the scene, but Augustine, my dear loyal Augustine, had arranged for a discreet, private observer to be present, and he had given me a full and deeply satisfying blow-by-blow account later that day. The eviction crew, a team of grim, efficient men in gray uniforms, had arrived at the brownstone at precisely 9 a.m. They were not sentimental, they were not judgmental, they were simply there to do a job. Sam and Lena were in a state of pure chaotic and deeply undignified panic. Their entire beautiful and deeply historic home was in a state of disarray, a whirlwind of half-packed boxes, overturned furniture and the general messy detritus of two lives that had just been violently upended. They had, in their arrogance, believed until the very last moment that something would happen, that their mother would swoop in and fix it. That this was all just some bizarre, elaborate test. They had not, until the moment the moving truck had actually backed up to their curb, truly believed that she would let this happen. Their fury, I was told, was a magnificent thing to behold. They had screamed at the movers. They had screamed at each other. And they had of course screamed at me, into the cold, silent and deeply unsympathetic ear of my voicemail. The call log on my phone from that morning was a testament to their spiraling, impotent rage. 47 missed calls. From Sam, from Lena, from a variety of blocked numbers as they had tried to circumvent my digital fortress. The final call, the one that Augustine had patched through to me so I could listen live to the final pathetic death rattle of their entitlement, had come at around noon. They were on the sidewalk, their possessions piled around them like the wreckage of a shipwreck, the movers driving away, the new locks being installed on the front door of the house that was no longer theirs. It was Lena who made the call. Her voice was not the cool, controlled instrument of the powerful political wife. It was the raw, ragged and deeply ugly shriek of a woman who has just lost everything. "Where are you?" she had screamed into the phone. "What have you done? You have stolen our home. You have stolen our inheritance. You have left us on the street with nothing." I had listened, my expression calm. I had let her scream herself hoarse, and when she was finally finished, when all that was left was the sound of her own ragged, gasping sobs, I had finally spoken. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was the calm, quiet and deeply final voice of a woman who was at long last completely and totally in control. "Augustine will be sending a car for you," I had said. 1 o'clock, be ready. The car that arrived for them was not a simple taxi. It was a sleek, black and deeply intimidating Cadillac Escalade, with tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that whispers of quiet, serious and very, very expensive power. The driver was a large impassive man in a dark suit who did not speak. He simply opened the rear doors and gestured for them to get in. Sam and Lena, who were sitting on a pile of their own boxed-up belongings on the sidewalk like two beautifully dressed refugees, were in no position to argue. They got into the car, their faces a mixture of confusion, resentment, and a new dawning flicker of fear. They assumed, of course, that they were being taken to Augustine's office for a final humiliating legal lecture. A place where they would be forced to sign papers to be officially and formally stripped of their birthright. The car, however, did not head towards the old, staid, and deeply traditional legal district of the city. It headed in the opposite direction. It headed downtown towards the new, glittering, and deeply ambitious heart of the new Washington, D.C. It moved through the bustling, powerful streets, past the gleaming, modern headquarters of lobbying firms and tech giants. And then it pulled up in front of a building that was so new, so tall, and so breathtakingly beautiful that it seemed to have been teleported from the future. It was a soaring 100-story skyscraper of black glass and steel, a magnificent architectural statement of pure unadulterated power and wealth. It was the newest, most exclusive and most talked about building in the entire city, and on the polished black granite above the massive revolving doors, in simple, elegant and deeply understated silver letters, was its name, the Jennings Tower. Sam and Lena just stared, their mouths agape. They had of course read about this building in the papers. It had been the talk of the city for the past year. A mysterious, anonymous and incredibly wealthy developer had built a monument that had single-handedly redefined the DC skyline. What are we doing here? Sam had stammered to the silent, impassive driver. The driver did not answer. He simply got out, opened their doors and led them into the lobby. The lobby was a cathedral of modern wealth. The ceilings were 50 feet high. The floors were a seamless expanse of polished white marble. The art on the walls was not the dusty old-fashioned stuff from their mother's house. It was a collection of massive, important-looking modern sculptures and paintings that were worth more than the brownstone they had just been evicted from. A concierge, a tall, elegant woman in a uniform that was sharper and more expensive than their own clothes, greeted them with a cool, professional smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Jennings Carter?" she said, her voice a low, cultured purr. "We've been expecting you. Right this way." She did not lead them to a normal elevator. She led them to a small, discreet and deeply exclusive door at the back of the lobby. It opened into a private elevator, its walls lined with dark, polished wood, its keypad requiring a special high-level security clearance. The concierge used her own keycard and then pressed a single glowing button at the very top of the panel, a button marked simply P for penthouse. The elevator began to ascend, its movement so smooth, so silent that it felt like they were floating. They were rising, up above the city, above their own small, petty and now completely ruined lives. They were on their way to a summons, a final and deeply mysterious judgment, and they had no idea who the judge was going to be. The private elevator ascended in a profound and deeply unsettling silence. There was no music, no soft hum of machinery, just the quiet, almost imperceptible sense of rising, of leaving the messy, complicated world of the city streets far below. Sam and Lena stood side by side, two strangers united by a shared and deeply confusing dread. The elevator did not ding when it arrived. It simply stopped. The polished wooden doors slid open, not into a hallway but directly into a space so vast, so beautiful and so breathtakingly opulent, that it seemed to defy the very laws of architecture. They had arrived at the penthouse. It was a 3-story, glass-walled palace in the sky. The living room alone was larger than the entire ground floor of the brownstone they had just been evicted from. The furniture was a collection of sleek, modern masterpieces. The art on the walls was not just art. It was a museum-quality collection of the most important black artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. A massive, vibrant Jacob Lawrence hung on one wall, a powerful, brooding Römer Bearden on another. But the most staggering thing was the view. The apartment was surrounded on all sides by floor-to-ceiling, 20-foot-high glass walls, offering a complete, uninterrupted, and utterly godlike 360-degree panorama of the entire city. They could see everything: the Capitol dome, gleaming white in the afternoon sun, the sharp, piercing finger of the Washington Monument, the slow, majestic curve of the Potomac River. It was a view of absolute and deeply intimidating power. They stepped out of the elevator as if into a dream, their feet silent on a rug that was so thick and so white it felt like walking on a cloud. The apartment was silent, empty. "Hello?" Sam called out, his voice a small, uncertain sound in the vast, echoing space. And then, from a grand, sweeping glass and steel staircase that seemed to float in the middle of the room, a figure appeared. It was me. I was not the woman they had seen just that morning. The woman in the simple practical dress. The woman whose life they had so casually and so contemptuously dismantled. The woman who descended those stairs was a stranger to them. I was dressed in an exquisitely tailored cream-colored silk pantsuit, a creation of a designer so exclusive they had probably never even heard of him. My gray hair, which I usually wore in a simple practical bun, had been styled into a sleek, elegant chignon. My only jewelry was a single magnificent and deeply, deeply real South Sea pearl necklace at my throat. I was not their mother. I was not the humble, hard-working owner of a soul-food restaurant. I was the queen of this palace, the master of this universe, and I had summoned them here to my throne room, for a final and deeply satisfying audience. I descended the stairs slowly, my movements calm and regal, my eyes never leaving their shocked, pale, and utterly uncomprehending faces. I stopped on the final step, looking down on them, both literally and metaphorically. They just stared, their mouths agape, their minds a chaotic, short-circuiting jumble of disbelief and a dawning, terrifying and world-shattering understanding. And then I spoke. My voice was not the warm, familiar and slightly weary voice of their mother. It was the quiet, clear and utterly unshakable voice of a woman who was, at long last, completely and totally in command. "You told me," I began, my voice a quiet, calm and deeply resonant thing that filled the vast, silent space, "that I needed to find my own place." I took the final step down from the staircase and onto the plush white rug. I walked with a slow, deliberate grace to the center of the room, to the very spot where the view of the city was most spectacular. "You told me," I continued, my back to them now, my gaze fixed on the panoramic, godlike view of the city below, that the old house was no longer big enough for all of us, that we didn't fit together there anymore. I turned slowly to face them. They were still frozen by the elevator, two small, insignificant figures in my vast new world. Their faces were a beautiful and deeply satisfying picture of pure, unadulterated and mind-breaking shock. "And you were right," I said, a small, cold and deeply triumphant smile touching my lips. "You were absolutely right. We didn't fit. Your ambitions had grown too large for that small, simple house. And my life, my real life, had certainly grown too large for it as well." I gestured with a sweep of my hand, a gesture that encompassed the entire breathtaking and deeply, deeply expensive space around them. The art, the furniture, the view. "So," I said, my voice a soft, final and utterly devastating whisper, "I found my own place." The last, final and most impossible piece of the puzzle slammed into place in their minds. The mysterious, anonymous developer. The quiet, staggering and deeply untraceable wealth. The Jennings Tower. Their mother. My mother. Martha Jennings, the woman who made the best damn fried chicken in all of DC. She had not just built a restaurant, she had built. Sam made a small choking sound as if he were trying to swallow his own tongue. Lena's face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with a new dawning and deeply humiliating horror. The full catastrophic scope of their miscalculation, of their profound and deeply arrogant underestimation of their own mother, was now laid bare. They had been fighting over a cracker while I had been sitting on a feast. They had been trying to steal a rowboat while I had been secretly captaining a battleship. They had looked at their mother, their entire lives, and they had seen a small, simple and slightly embarrassing woman. They had never once in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined that she was a queen, and that this entire glittering and deeply powerful city was her kingdom. They stood there in the doorway of my new life, two statues of pure unadulterated shock. The world they had known, the world where they were the ambitious, forward-thinking children and I was the simple, old-fashioned mother, had been completely and utterly annihilated, and they were left standing in the ruins, with nothing to hold on to. "How," Lena finally managed to whisper, her voice a raw, broken thing. "How is this possible?" I gave her a long, quiet, and deeply sorrowful look. "It's possible, Lena," I said, my voice no longer cold, but now tinged with a deep and very real sadness for the children I had lost. "Because while you and your brother were busy being ashamed of my work, I was busy working. While you were complaining about the dust on your inheritance, I was busy building one." I walked over to the vast glass wall and looked down at the city, at my city. "You saw the restaurant as a cage," I said, more to myself than to them. "A small, greasy and deeply embarrassing cage. To me it was a foundation of hard work, of real value, of a community that I loved and that loved me back. And I used that foundation, I said, turning back to face them, my voice now a quiet, powerful testament to a life they had never seen. To build all of this, I gestured again to the palace around them, to the glittering, powerful city outside. Every brick in this building, I said, every pane of glass, every single solitary dollar of the 100 million it took to build it, was earned with the profits from that greasy spoon you so profoundly despised. The final devastating truth of it, the sheer poetic justice of it, was a thing of almost biblical power. The very thing they had been ashamed of, the source of their lifelong resentment, had been the secret, silent engine of the very wealth and power they had so desperately craved. They had no words. What could they possibly say? There were no apologies that could bridge this chasm. There were no excuses that could explain away their own profound and deeply arrogant blindness. You wanted your inheritance, I said, my voice now a soft, final whisper. I looked at their stunned, horrified faces, and I felt not triumph, not anger, but a deep and very real pity. This is it. I gestured to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, to the breathtaking panoramic view of the city. Your inheritance, I said, my voice a quiet and utterly final judgment, is a view, a perfect, beautiful and deeply, deeply expensive view. A view of everything you could have had, if you had just for one single moment, seen your own mother for who she truly was. I turned my back on them then, a final quiet and deeply symbolic dismissal. You were right, I said, my gaze once again fixed on the horizon, on the future, on my new quiet and deeply powerful life. We didn't fit together in that little house anymore. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a city to run. I did not have to hear them leave. I did not have to watch as they stumbled back into the elevator, back down to the world of the small, and the petty, and the broken. I just stood there in my new home, in my new life, a queen in her castle, at long last, completely and totally at peace.